Let's do a sewing pattern review for this boat neck dress. Welcome, I do sewing and DIY related content, and I had some of this white fabric on hand. I had some really pretty beaded fabric, and then of course we had the kitty, and I decided to make a new boat neck dress. Now I did this using a Kiana Bonolo pattern, so she had this pattern available on her Etsy store, and I followed it to make this dress, and I thought today we could do a pattern review, so I'll talk about what I liked with the pattern, what I found was really easy to follow, what parts could be a little challenging, and then my overall thoughts on using this. So for this pattern, it actually comes with three different options. I went with option A, which was this kind of shorter boat neck dress option. It was supposed to be the easier of the options. I specifically did that because I knew I was going to be working with this beaded material and that was going to just already take this from like a level 1 to like a level 10 just because of how difficult beaded fabrics can be. But the big thing about each of those patterns, depending on which one you do, they heavily rely on darts. So there's a lot of parts of the pattern where you really need to transfer over these darts correctly. And that was the main fitting element for this dress, is just working through the darts. Now for the fitting, I did the lining first, as I just used a really cheap white cotton for that. So if it didn't fit right, I could get more of that white cotton. When I measured myself against the measurement she had provided, it showed that I would have been a size 2. After I went through this whole process with this lining of sewing the darts in, it was still a little big, so I had to adjust that. But I would highly recommend making that mock-up first, especially in case the sizing is a little bit off for you as well. Now for the darts themselves, there were a lot of darts. She recommended using tracing paper, and I can definitely see why. It probably would have made this a lot quicker. I just did not have any on hand, and I was trying not to buy something else. So that's why I did those little tack stitches and then just basically connected the dots to create those darts. And then once I had that all done for the lining, I would then just repeat all of those same steps, especially with those little alterations that I had figured out for the main fabric as well. So she does talk a lot about using a serger, so she used that to finish off most of the edges. It does make it look really nice, but something to keep in mind, if you don't have a serger, you can get a similar effect with like a zigzag stitch or an overlock stitch. I know personally when I did not have a serger, I did feel a little bit like out of the loop. So something also to keep in mind, that some of those images and when she has her video, she specifically does talk about using the serger and working with it. So here's what my lining ended up looking like. It did look really clean, looked really nice. I did also use the lining as a learning opportunity to know which areas were slightly harder. So I would recommend for you to do that as well if you are just trying to go in with this on the first try, or if you're using really expensive fabric like I was using for that outer portion, just making sure you understand each of the items step by step before you really dive in. Now, once you get through the actual dart sewing process, most of this was pretty quick to put together because it's just sewing up the side seams, sewing the shoulder seams, making it so that you have that main shell of your dress as well as the main lining, going through, cleaning all of this up with your serger so that it looks nice and neat. Another tip that I would provide is once you get the main shell done and the lining, be sure to try this on just one final time to make sure that the fit is exactly how you wanted. I ended up adjusting it one more time at this point, really taking in the sides. It was a little bulging on top for me, so this just gave me the perfect opportunity to do one more final test before I went through the process of adding the zipper, adding more of those components that make it a little bit more challenging. I will say that the zipper is another spot where things can be a little harder. I think if you use just like pure cotton material like they were recommending for that true beginner friendly item, that it wouldn't be too bad. But just remember, this is an invisible zipper, so sometimes those do take a few more tries to get through. You want to do some basting with it. You want to really take your time to get that nice and neat so that you're not going to be able to see it. And I think for a true beginner that can be a little bit challenging just to walk through all of those steps. I did see some people also saying that for some of the other options for the dresses, that those got a little bit more difficult because there's curves involved. It had some different shapes and movement to it. So depending on what your skill level is, be sure you really watch her instructional video for what's going to be the best for you when you're working through that pattern. Once I had gotten through the probably challenge of doing the zipper, the rest of this dress came together very easily. You were just sewing the lining into the rest of the shell, you're finishing up the edges where she has used bias tape, and then you're taking a hem. So very simple instructions for the rest of the dress. I really do think that that invisible zipper is just where things are a little bit more challenging with this. So if you've never done one of those before, I would highly recommend practicing sewing some invisible zippers, taking your time with it. You can definitely get them pretty cheap on Amazon, so you could always buy a couple and then do some tests before you do your main dress. The other portion I will say that did take a little bit of time or just a little bit more concentration is understitching. So at the neck for this, you are going to need to understitch the lining in. So I would highly recommend looking up more videos if understitching is a new concept to you. But overall, like the understitching and the invisible zipper, that was really all that I had a big issue with as far as I could see it being challenging for a brand new sewer or somebody who is really at that beginner level. Now, in the pattern itself, there were a couple places where I took some creative liberties. For example, I used hem tape instead of binding as I had this on hand and I did not have any binding that was the right measurements. I found this was a really easy way to go through it. I think as long as you're aware of how to use that technique and you can substitute, then it really doesn't matter. As you can see, the armhole ended up looking nice and clean anyways, so it's not like it was a huge distractor from what its purpose is. And overall, I absolutely do love this dress. I think it turned out really nicely. It's probably one of my favorite pieces I've made, but I think it's more because I had to do so much time on working through each of these stitches. For the pattern itself, she has some written instructions as well as that instructional video. I do wish that there would have been a little bit more written instructions. I personally am somebody who does love like having those written instructions next to me, so I don't need to keep referring to a video. But the video was incredibly helpful, and I know most people like watching a video, so I'm not going to really ding her or anything for that. It really is just more about your learning style and how you would be want to learn how to put this together. Overall, I think this was a really fun pattern. I learned a lot from it, and it was a really quick make. I could see myself making more of these dresses if needed, or trying out some of those other options for future events. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. I will include a link to the original pattern below in case you want to make one yourself. Thanks for watching.